How did a child's drawing end with my son unemployed, exposed, and watching a judge hand his father full guardianship? Why did I smile that night, knowing that within days his carefully built image would collapse in public? This is how I stopped pretending nothing was wrong, and handled it the only way that works. The gift bag sat untouched on the coffee table where I'd placed it 20 minutes earlier. Inside was a small model car kit. Nothing expensive, just something I thought Noah might enjoy building with his grandfather. But Marina had already redirected the conversation twice, and Lucas was scrolling through his phone, muttering about some investor call that hadn't gone as planned. "Ethan, sweetie, show Grandpa Cedric your science project," Marina cooed, her voice taking on that artificially bright tone she used whenever she wanted to demonstrate her superior parenting. Ethan, all 11 years of aggressive confidence, launched into a detailed explanation of his volcano model while Noah sat quietly in the corner, forgotten. I'd been coming to these Sunday visits for 2 years now, ever since Lucas married Marina and moved into this house that I was still helping pay for. The routine never changed. I'd arrive with something small for Noah, watch it get overshadowed by whatever Ethan was doing, and leave an hour later feeling like I'd witnessed something I couldn't quite name but definitely didn't like. "Can I show Grandpa my drawing?" Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Not now, honey," Marina said without looking at him. "Ethan's talking." I watched my grandson's face fall, that familiar expression of resigned disappointment settling over his features. At 7 years old, Noah had already learned to expect disappointment. He'd learned to ask permission for everything while his stepbrother took whatever he wanted. He'd learned to make himself small. "I'd like to see your drawing, Noah," I said, keeping my voice level. Marina's smile tightened. "Maybe later. We don't want to interrupt Ethan's presentation." Lucas finally looked up from his phone. "Dad, let's just let them work it out themselves. Kids need to learn to share attention." Share attention. As if Noah had been getting any attention to share. We moved to the backyard after Ethan finished his monologue about volcanic eruptions. The boys ran toward the swing set, but what happened next was a perfect microcosm of everything wrong in this house. Ethan shoved Noah aside to get to the better swing, sending my grandson stumbling into the dirt. "Ethan," I started, but Marina was already there. "Noah, you need to be more careful," she said, brushing dirt off his shirt with sharp, irritated movements. "You know Ethan plays rougher than you do. You have to watch out for yourself." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Marina," Ethan pushed him. "Boys will be boys, Cedric. They're just playing." I saw what happened. Lucas appeared beside us, that familiar expression of mild annoyance crossing his face. "Dad, please don't parent from the sidelines. We've got this handled." Handled? I looked at Noah, who was staring at me with those wide, searching eyes, looking for something. Protection, validation, just acknowledgement that what had happened to him mattered. But his father was already walking away, and his stepmother was fussing over Ethan, who was laughing about something with his friends. The visit limped to its usual conclusion. Promises to get together again soon that felt increasingly hollow. Marina's pointed comments about how busy they were with family activities that somehow never included me. Lucas's distracted nods as he checked his phone for the 15th time. As I slipped on my coat in the hallway, Noah appeared beside me like a shadow. "Grandpa?" His voice was so quiet I had to lean down to hear him. "What is it, buddy?" He pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand, his small fingers trembling slightly. "I made this for you." I looked down at the drawing, a crayon sketch of 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, standing next to what looked like a car. "This is beautiful, Noah. Thank you." He glanced around quickly, then whispered, "Read the back later." Something in his tone made my stomach clench, but I managed to keep smiling. "I will, I promise." "Okay." He hesitated, then added in an even quieter voice, "I love you, Grandpa." "I love you too, buddy." I ruffled his hair and headed for the door, the drawing folded carefully in my coat pocket. Behind me, I could hear Marina calling Noah to help clean up, her voice already carrying that edge of impatience that seemed to follow my grandson everywhere in this house. It wasn't until I was sitting in my truck in their driveway that I unfolded the paper and read what Noah had written on the back in his careful, second-grade handwriting. "Grandpa, please take me with you. Don't act like anything happened." I stared at those words until they blurred. A 7-year-old child had just handed me a cry for help disguised as a gift, with explicit instructions not to reveal that he'd done it. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about sibling rivalry or adjustment issues. This wasn't about Marina being a little strict or Lucas being distracted by work. This was a child who felt unsafe in his own home, desperate enough to risk whatever consequences he imagined might come from reaching out to me. I started the engine and drove home in silence, Noah's drawing on the passenger seat beside me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and really looked at it for the first time. The two stick figures weren't just standing next to a car. They were holding hands, and the car's trunk was open, as if they were going somewhere together. Even in crayon, I could see the hope in that simple drawing, but it was the message on the back that kept me awake. Don't act like anything happened. A 7-year-old shouldn't know to write those words. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to strategize about how to ask for help without getting in trouble for asking. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to protect the adults around him from the consequences of his honesty. I placed the drawing in an envelope and wrote the date on it. Then I sat back and forced myself to think clearly, methodically, the way I approached any complex problem at the shop. This wasn't going to be fixed with a conversation. Lucas had already made it clear that my concerns weren't welcome. Marina had established her dominance over the household, and Noah's needs were clearly at the bottom of everyone's priority list. If I confronted them directly, they'd close ranks, and Noah would be the one who suffered for it. But there were other ways to handle problems. Better ways. I pulled out my calendar and wrote 4 words that would change everything. Check with the school. The next morning, I opened the shop as usual, but my mind wasn't on carburetors and brake pads. I kept thinking about Noah's drawing, about the careful way he'd handed it to me, about the fear in his voice when he'd whispered instructions to read it later. How long had he been planning that moment? How many visits had he watched me leave, wanting to say something but not knowing how? I'd been telling myself for months that things would settle down, that Marina just needed time to adjust to having Noah in the house, that Lucas was just stressed about money and his latest business venture. I'd been making excuses because I wanted to believe that my son wouldn't let his child be neglected, that the problems I was seeing were temporary growing pains rather than a fundamental dysfunction. But as I sat in my office that morning, I forced myself to review the pattern of visits over the past 2 years, and what I saw made my chest tight with anger. Not the explosive kind, but the cold, focused kind that leads to action. It had started small. Marina redirecting conversations away from Noah, Lucas being too busy to engage with his son during my visits, Ethan being allowed to interrupt or overshadow Noah without correction. I told myself these were minor issues, normal blended family challenges. Then came the gift incidents. Presents I brought for Noah would mysteriously disappear or be put away for safekeeping and never seen again. When I asked about them, I'd get vague responses about Noah not taking care of his things or needing to learn to share. Meanwhile, Ethan's belongings were prominently displayed and carefully protected. The physical signs had been escalating too, though I'd been reluctant to acknowledge them. Noah had gotten thinner over the past year. He flinched at loud voices. He asked permission for everything, even to use the bathroom in his own home. He'd started having what Marina called behavioral issues at school, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, problems with other children, but it was the emotional pattern that cut deepest. Noah had gone from being a bright, curious child to being a shadow of himself. He watched adults constantly, trying to read their moods, trying to anticipate what they wanted from him. He'd learned to make himself invisible, to need nothing, to expect nothing. And I'd watched it happen. I'd seen every sign, noted every change, and told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Fallon's Auto. Mr. Fallon, this is Mrs. Henderson from Riverside Elementary. I have Noah in my office, and I was wondering if you might be available to pick him up today. A sudden chill ran through me. What's wrong? Is he hurt? He's not injured, but he's quite upset. We tried calling his parents, but we're not getting an answer. He gave us your number and said you were his emergency contact. I wasn't his emergency contact. Lucas had never put me on any of Noah's school forms, but Noah had given them my number anyway, which told me everything I needed to know about who he trusted to help him. I'll be right there. I closed the shop and drove to the school, my mind racing. When I arrived, I found Noah sitting in the counselor's office, his small frame hunched in a chair that seemed too big for him. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying anymore. Grandpa. He jumped up and ran to me, wrapping his arms around my waist with desperate intensity. Hey, buddy, what happened? Mrs. Henderson, the school counselor, gestured for me to sit down. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who'd clearly been doing this job long enough to recognize the signs of a child in distress. Noah had what we might call a panic episode during lunch today, she explained carefully. Another child was teasing him about his lunch. Apparently he's been bringing the same peanut butter sandwich every day for weeks, and Noah became very upset. Not angry, but frightened. He kept saying he was sorry and that he didn't mean to cause trouble. I looked down at Noah, who was still clinging to my side. Buddy, you're not in trouble. You don't need to apologize for being upset. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we tried to tell him. But Mr. Fallon, I have to ask, are there some challenges at home we should be aware of? This isn't the first incident we've had with Noah this year. What kind of incidents? She pulled out a file that was thicker than I'd expected. Difficulty concentrating in class, anxiety about making mistakes. He's been falling asleep during lessons, which suggests he's not getting adequate rest, and there have been some concerning drawings in art class. Concerning how? Dark themes, isolation, figures that appear to be hiding or trapped. She paused, studying my face. Noah is a bright child, Mr. Fallon, but he's exhibiting classic signs of chronic stress. We've documented several instances where he's come to school with bruises that he attributes to playing with his brother, but the patterns are unusual. My jaw tightened. What kind of patterns? Bruises on his arms that look more like grip marks. A black eye last month that he said came from running into a door. We're required to document these things, you understand? I understood perfectly. They were building a file, following protocol, creating a paper trail that could be used if necessary. The question was whether it would ever become necessary, or if Noah would just continue to slip through the cracks of a system that preferred to document problems rather than solve them. Mrs. Henderson, what would it take for someone like me, Noah's grandfather, to become more involved in his care? She studied me carefully. That would depend on the circumstances. If there were concerns about his current living situation, there are procedures that could be followed. But that's a conversation you'd want to have with a family attorney. I nodded, filing that information away. For now, can I take him home? Of course. And Mr. Fallon, Noah speaks about you often. It's clear that you're very important to him. As we walked to my truck, Noah slipped his small hand into mine. Am I in trouble, Grandpa? No, buddy, you're not in trouble. Sometimes when we're upset, our feelings get too big to keep inside, and that's okay. That's normal. Ethan says I'm a crybaby. I stopped walking and knelt down so I was at his eye level. Noah, listen to me. Having feelings doesn't make you a crybaby. It makes you human. And anyone who tries to make you feel bad for having feelings is wrong. He nodded solemnly, but I could see he didn't quite believe me. He'd been told he was too sensitive, too emotional, too much trouble for too long to accept that his feelings were valid. I drove him back to his house, where Marina met us at the door with an expression of barely controlled irritation. What happened? The school called, but I was in a meeting and couldn't answer. Noah had a difficult day. He's fine now. She looked at Noah with that familiar expression of exasperated disappointment. What did you do now? He didn't do anything wrong, I said firmly. He got upset, which is normal for a 7-year-old. Cedric, you don't understand how sensitive he is. He overreacts to everything. We're working with him on building resilience. Resilience. As if a 7-year-old's emotional distress was a character flaw to be corrected, rather than a symptom of a deeper problem. I spent another hour at the house, watching the familiar dynamics play out. Noah retreating into himself, Ethan commanding attention, Marina managing everyone's behavior except the one child who actually needed guidance. Lucas arriving home distracted and irritated, immediately launching into complaints about his day without asking about anyone else's. When I finally left, I sat in my truck for a long moment, staring at the house where my grandson was learning that his needs didn't matter, his feelings were inconvenient, and his safety was conditional on his ability to stay invisible. That night, I pulled out my phone and called Rachel Moore, a family attorney I'd met through my insurance agent. We'd never worked together, but she had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. Rachel, this is Cedric Fallon. I need to schedule a consultation about a custody matter. Of course, Cedric. When would you like to come in? As soon as possible. And Rachel, this needs to stay completely confidential until I decide how to proceed. Understood. How about tomorrow afternoon? After I hung up, I went to my kitchen table and pulled out Noah's drawing again. Such a simple picture, a grandfather and grandson holding hands, going somewhere together. But underneath that innocence was a child's desperate hope that someone would save him from a situation he was too young to understand, but old enough to know was wrong. I placed the drawing back in its envelope and added Mrs. Henderson's business card beside it. Then I opened my laptop and started researching family law, grandparents' rights, and the legal requirements for emergency custody changes. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan. Not the kind of plan that relied on good intentions or family conversations, or hoping things would improve on their own. The kind of plan that involved documentation, legal precedent, and consequences that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Noah had asked me to take him with me. I was going to find a way to do exactly that. Rachel Moore's office was exactly what I'd expected. Professional, organized, and designed to put clients at ease while discussing the most difficult situations in their lives. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with graying hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every story and wasn't easily shocked. "Tell me about your grandson," she said after we'd settled into chairs across from her desk. I pulled out Noah's drawing and the notes I'd made about the school incidents. "His name is Noah. He's 7 years old, and he's living in a situation that's getting worse." I walked her through everything systematically: the pattern of neglect, the favoritism toward the stepbrother, the school's concerns, the physical signs, and finally, Noah's desperate plea for help. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "What's your son's current employment situation?" she asked when I finished. "Unstable. He's been jumping from one failed startup to another for the past 3 years. I've been covering most of his living expenses, including the house payment, utilities, and Noah's needs." "And you have documentation of this financial support? Bank records, canceled checks, receipts? Lucas has never been shy about asking for money." Rachel nodded, making another note. "What about Noah's mother?" "She passed away in a car accident when Noah was 3. Lucas has been his only parent since then, legally speaking." "I see. And the stepmother has no legal relationship to Noah?" "None. She and Lucas married 2 years ago, but she never adopted him. As far as the law is concerned, Marina is just someone who lives in the house. That's actually helpful for our purposes." Rachel set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Cedric, I need to be clear about what you're asking for. Emergency custody changes are serious legal matters. They require evidence of immediate harm or neglect, and they can be emotionally devastating for everyone involved." "I understand that." "Do you? Because once we start this process, there's no going back quietly. Your son will lose custody of his child, at least temporarily. His wife will be publicly identified as a contributing factor to that loss. Your family relationships will be permanently altered." I thought about Noah's face when Ethan had pushed him, the way he'd looked at me hoping for protection that I hadn't provided. I thought about his careful handwriting on the back of that drawing. "Please take me with you." "Rachel, I've been trying to handle this quietly for 2 years. I've been hoping things would improve, making excuses for behavior that I knew was wrong, telling myself that it wasn't my place to interfere, and while I've been being polite and patient, my grandson has been learning that no one will protect him." "All right then, here's what we need to do." Over the next hour, Rachel outlined the legal process for seeking emergency custody. We would need to document the pattern of neglect, gather evidence from the school, possibly involve Child Protective Services, and demonstrate that I was a suitable guardian who could provide a stable home for Noah. "The good news is that you have several factors in your favor," she explained. "You're financially stable, you have an established relationship with Noah, you're already providing significant support for his current household, and most importantly, you have documentation of ongoing concerns from his school." "What about Lucas and Marina? What kind of defense can they mount?" "They'll likely argue that you're interfering in their family, that the issues are temporary, that they're working to address any problems. They might claim that Noah is manipulating the situation or that you're overreacting to normal childhood difficulties." I thought about Marina's dismissive attitude toward Noah's needs, Lucas's complete emotional absence from his son's life, the way they'd both brushed off the school's concerns as teacher overreaction. They'll have a hard time arguing that they're addressing problems they refuse to acknowledge exist. Exactly. But Cedric, I need you to understand that this process will get ugly. They're going to feel attacked, betrayed, blindsided. They're going to say things about you and about Noah that will be difficult to hear. Let them. I'm more concerned about what happens to Noah if I don't act than what they might say about me if I do. Rachel smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Good. That's the right attitude. Now here's what I need you to do. She handed me a list of documents to gather and people to contact. School records, medical records, financial statements, character references. She also gave me specific instructions about documenting any future incidents without interfering in a way that might compromise our case. How long will this take? I asked. If we move quickly and the evidence is as clear as you've described, we could have a hearing within 2 to 3 weeks. But Cedric, once we file these papers, everything changes immediately. Your son will be notified, and he'll have the right to legal representation. The court may order temporary arrangements while the case is pending. What kind of temporary arrangements? Supervised visits, restricted access, possibly immediate placement of Noah with you if the judge determines there's imminent risk. It depends on how the evidence presents. I left Rachel's office with a thick folder of forms to complete and a timeline that felt both too fast and not fast enough. Noah was going home to that house every night, navigating the emotional minefield that his family had become while I was building a legal case that might take weeks to resolve. But I also left with something I hadn't had before, a clear path forward that didn't depend on Lucas suddenly becoming a better father or Marina suddenly caring about Noah's well-being. This was a path that led through the legal system, where evidence mattered more than excuses and where a child's safety took precedence over adult convenience. That afternoon, I drove to the school and requested a meeting with Mrs. Henderson and Noah's teacher. I explained that I was exploring legal options for becoming more involved in Noah's care, and I needed their professional assessment of his situation. "Mr. Fallon, I have to tell you, we've been hoping someone would ask these questions," Mrs. Henderson said. "We see children from difficult home situations regularly, and we know how to differentiate between normal adjustment issues and genuine distress. Noah is genuinely distressed." She pulled out his file again, thicker now than it had been just a few days earlier. "His academic performance has declined significantly this year. He's gone from being an engaged, curious student to being withdrawn and anxious. He apologizes constantly, even for things that aren't mistakes. He hoards food from the cafeteria, which suggests he's not confident about when his next meal will come." "What about the physical signs?" "We've documented 17 separate incidents of unexplained bruises, cuts, or marks over the past school year. Noah's explanations are always the same. He fell, he ran into something, he was playing too rough with his stepbrother, but the patterns don't match those explanations." Noah's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, nodded grimly, and his drawings in art class have become increasingly dark. Children often express their emotional state through art, and Noah's pictures consistently show isolated figures, dark colors, themes of hiding or being trapped. "Would you be willing to provide written statements about these observations?" "Absolutely," Mrs. Henderson said without hesitation. "And Mr. Fallon, we want you to know that Noah talks about you constantly. You're clearly the most stable, positive relationship in his life right now. That evening, I called Victor Hale, Lucas's current employer. Victor and I had known each other for years. He'd brought his cars to my shop, and we'd developed the kind of straightforward business relationship that sometimes evolves into friendship. "Cedric, good to hear from you. How's business?" "Can't complain. Victor, I need to ask you about Lucas, and I need you to know this conversation is confidential." There was a pause. "Is he in some kind of trouble?" "Not the kind you're thinking, but I'm dealing with a family situation, and I need to understand his employment status." Victor sighed. "Honestly, Cedric, I hired Lucas as a favor to you, and because he interviewed well. But his performance has been disappointing. He's missed deadlines, failed to follow through on client communications, and he seems more interested in pitching his own business ideas than doing the work I'm paying him for." "How disappointing." "I've been documenting performance issues for the past 6 months. I was actually planning to have a conversation with him next week about whether this position is working out." I felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. Lucas's employment was already hanging by a thread, which meant the financial support I was providing wasn't supplementing a stable income. It was essentially his family's only reliable source of money. "Victor, I'm not asking you to do anything differently than you normally would, but if you're planning to make employment decisions based on performance, the timing might be relevant to some other things that are happening." "I understand. And Cedric, I hope whatever's going on with your family works out. Lucas is lucky to have you looking out for him." If only he knew. Over the next week, I methodically gathered every piece of evidence Rachel had requested. Bank statements showing 2 years of financial support, school records documenting Noah's declining performance and increasing behavioral concerns, medical records from the pediatrician showing missed appointments and delayed treatments for minor injuries. But the most damning evidence came from Noah himself, though he didn't know he was providing it. During my next visit, I watched him flinch when Lucas raised his voice at the television. I saw him ask Marina's permission to get a drink of water from his own kitchen. I observed him give up his seat to Ethan without being asked, then stand quietly in the corner waiting for permission to sit somewhere else. A 7-year-old child had learned to live like a guest in his own home, and the adults responsible for his care saw this as good behavior rather than a symptom of emotional abuse. That night, I called Rachel and told her I was ready to file the papers. "Are you sure, Cedric? Once we do this, there's no undoing it quietly." I looked at Noah's drawing, still in its envelope on my kitchen table. "I'm sure. How do we start?" "I'll file the emergency petition tomorrow morning. Your son will be served with papers by Thursday. The initial hearing is scheduled for the following Monday." "And Noah?" "Depending on what the judge decides at the preliminary hearing, Noah could be placed with you as early as next week, pending the full custody evaluation." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about what the next few weeks would bring. Lucas would be furious, betrayed, probably convinced that I was destroying his family out of spite or control. Marina would be outraged at having her authority questioned. There would be accusations, arguments, probably threats. But there would also be Noah, finally safe, finally in a place where his needs mattered more than everyone else's convenience. I pulled out my calendar and marked the date of the hearing. In less than 2 weeks, a judge would decide whether my grandson continued living in a house where he was neglected and emotionally abused, or whether he came home with me to a place where he could just be a 7-year-old child. It wasn't even a difficult choice. The papers were served on Thursday morning while Lucas was at work. I knew because Victor called me an hour later. "Cedric, what the hell is going on? Lucas just stormed out of here talking about lawyers and custody papers and how you're trying to steal his son." "It's complicated, Victor. He's demanding time off to deal with this legal situation. He seems to think this is some kind of misunderstanding that can be cleared up quickly." I could hear the frustration in Victor's voice, and I understood it. Lucas had probably presented this as a family dispute, a grandfather overstepping his bounds, something that would be resolved with a conversation and an apology. He had no idea that I'd been building a case for weeks, or that the evidence was overwhelming. "Victor, remember what we talked about regarding his performance issues?" "Yeah." "You might want to move forward with that conversation sooner rather than later. This legal situation is going to get more complicated before it gets simpler, and you probably don't want it affecting your business." There was a long pause. "I understand. Thanks for the heads up." Lucas called me 20 minutes later, and I could hear the rage and panic in his voice before he even started talking. "Dad, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm protecting my grandson." "Protecting him from what? From his family? From his father?" "From neglect, Lucas. From a situation that's been getting worse for 2 years while you've been too distracted by your business schemes to notice." "Business schemes? Dad, I'm trying to build a future for my family. I'm trying to create something that will provide for Noah's college, for his future, for... You're trying to create excuses for why you can't be bothered to parent your son right now. And while you've been chasing your next big idea, Noah has been falling apart." "That's not true. He's fine. He's just adjusting to having a stepmother and stepbrother. It takes time." 2 years, Lucas. It's been 2 years and he's gotten worse, not better." "According to who? According to you? You see him for an hour every week. You don't know what goes on in our house." "I know what I see. I know what his school reports. I know what he tells me." There was a pause, and when Lucas spoke again, his voice had shifted from anger to something that sounded almost like desperation. "Dad, you can't take my son away from me. Whatever problems you think you see, we can work them out. Marina and I can make changes. We can go to counseling. We can... Lucas, when was the last time you spent an hour alone with Noah? When was the last time you asked him about school, or helped him with homework, or read him a bedtime story?" Silence. "When was the last time you noticed that he's lost weight? That he flinches when people raise their voices? That he asks permission for everything because he's learned that his needs are always secondary to everyone else's convenience?" More silence. "I'm not taking Noah away from you, Lucas. You gave him away a long time ago. You just never made it official." He hung up on me. Marina called an hour later, and her approach was completely different. Where Lucas had been emotional and reactive, Marina was calculating and manipulative. "Cedric, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Lucas is very upset, and I'm hoping we can resolve this without involving the courts." "What kind of misunderstanding, Marina?" "You seem to think that Noah is being mistreated in our home, and I can understand how some situations might have looked concerning to someone who doesn't see the full picture. But Cedric, Noah is a challenging child. He requires very consistent boundaries and structure." "Challenging how?" "He's manipulative. He plays adults against each other. He makes up stories to get attention. He's been seeing a counselor at school because he has difficulty with truthfulness." I felt cold anger settle in my chest. She was trying to reframe Noah's cries for help as behavioral problems, his emotional distress as manipulation, his desperate attempts to connect with me as dishonesty. "Marina, are you saying Noah lied about wanting to come live with me?" "I'm saying Noah is 7 years old, and 7-year-olds don't understand the consequences of what they're asking for. He doesn't really want to leave his family, Cedric. He's just learned that saying dramatic things gets him attention from adults. So when he asks permission to get a drink of water in his own home, that's manipulation. That's him testing boundaries. Children need to learn that there are rules and expectations. And when Ethan pushes him and you blame Noah for not being more careful, that's teaching him what kind of lesson?" Her voice sharpened. "Ethan is 11 years old, and he's been through a difficult adjustment too. His father passed away when he was young, and he's had to learn to share his mother's attention. Sometimes he acts out, and Noah needs to learn how to handle that appropriately. By accepting that his stepbrother can hurt him without consequences. By learning resilience, Cedric. By learning that the world isn't always fair, and that he can't run to an adult every time something doesn't go his way. I understood then that there was no point in continuing this conversation. Marina genuinely believed that Noah's distress was a character flaw to be corrected rather than a symptom of the toxic environment she'd created. She saw his emotional needs as inconvenient demands for attention rather than the normal requirements of a 7-year-old child. Marina, I'll see you in court on Monday. Cedric, wait, please. Can't we work something out? Some kind of arrangement where you get more visitation time, maybe take Noah for weekends? You don't need to destroy our family to spend more time with your grandson. Your family destroyed itself. I'm just making it official. The weekend was tense, in a way I hadn't expected. I'd thought I would feel more confident now that the legal process was underway, but instead I found myself second-guessing every decision. Was I overreacting? Was there some way this could have been handled differently? Was I really acting in Noah's best interests, or was I letting my anger at Lucas and Marina cloud my judgment? But then Lucas called on Sunday night, and any doubts I had evaporated. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Go ahead. Is this really about Noah, or is this about punishing me for not living up to your expectations? The question hit me like a physical blow, not because it was unfair, but because it revealed how completely Lucas misunderstood both his situation and my motivations. Lucas, do you think I enjoy this? Do you think I wanted to spend my retirement years fighting my own son in court over the safety of my grandson? I think you've never approved of the choices I've made, and now you're using Noah as a way to control my life. Your choices, Lucas. Let's talk about your choices. You chose to marry a woman who treats your son like an inconvenience. You chose to prioritize business ventures over parenting. You chose to ignore every sign that Noah was struggling. You chose to dismiss the school's concerns, my concerns, and ultimately Noah's own attempts to ask for help. I've been trying to build something, Dad. I've been working to create a stable future for my family. You've been running away from the responsibility of being a father, and you've been using your business ambitions as an excuse. And while you've been chasing success that never comes, your son has been disappearing. That's not fair. Fair? Lucas, Noah drew me a picture asking me to take him away from his own home. A 7-year-old child was so desperate that he risked whatever consequences he imagined might come from reaching out to me. And you want to talk about what's fair? There was a long silence, and when Lucas spoke again, his voice was quiet and defeated. What do you want from me, Dad? I want you to be Noah's father, but since you've made it clear that's not going to happen, I want you to step aside and let me protect him. And if I don't? Then a judge will make the decision for you, and Lucas, when that happens, it won't be because I destroyed your family. It will be because you never built one in the first place. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove to the courthouse. Rachel met me in the lobby, carrying a thick briefcase and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested she'd reviewed our evidence and liked our chances. How are you feeling? She asked as we walked toward the courtroom. Like I'm about to blow up my family to save my grandson. That's exactly what you're doing, and it's exactly the right thing to do. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic legal setting I'd imagined. Lucas was already there with his attorney, a young man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in damage control rather than family law. Marina sat beside them, her face a mask of controlled anger. But it was Noah's presence that surprised me most. He was sitting in the front row with Mrs. Henderson, wearing his best clothes and looking smaller than ever in the formal setting. When he saw me, he waved tentatively, and I felt my resolve solidify. Judge Patricia Branter was a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly presided over thousands of custody disputes. She reviewed the paperwork efficiently, asked several pointed questions about the timeline and evidence, and then looked directly at me. Mr. Fallon, this is a serious petition you've filed. You're asking this court to remove a child from his father's custody and place him with you. That's not a decision we make lightly. I understand that, Your Honor, but I believe Noah is in immediate emotional danger in his current living situation. She turned to Lucas. Mr. Fallon, how do you respond to these allegations? Lucas's attorney stood up, but Lucas waved him off and answered directly. Your Honor, my father and I have had disagreements about parenting styles, but I love my son, and I've never hurt him. I think this is a misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand. Mr. Fallon, are you familiar with the school reports regarding your son's behavioral changes and academic decline? Yes, but Noah has always been a sensitive child. The school tends to overreact to normal childhood issues. Judge Brantor looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, you've submitted a detailed report about Noah's condition at school. Can you summarize your professional assessment? Mrs. Henderson stood and spoke clearly and calmly. Your Honor, in my 15 years as a school counselor, I've worked with hundreds of children from various family situations. Noah exhibits classic signs of chronic emotional distress and neglect. His academic performance has declined significantly. He shows signs of anxiety and hypervigilance, and he's demonstrated concerning behaviors that suggest he doesn't feel safe or valued in his home environment. And what is your professional recommendation? I believe Noah would benefit from placement in a stable, nurturing environment where his emotional and physical needs are prioritized. Based on my interactions with Mr. Cedric Fallon, I believe he can provide that environment. The judge reviewed several more documents, asked questions about my financial stability and living situation, and then made a decision that changed everything. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. Cedric Fallon pending a full evaluation. Mr. Lucas Fallon, you will have supervised visitation rights, and both parties will undergo court-ordered counseling. We'll reconvene in 6 weeks for a final determination. Lucas stood up abruptly. Your Honor, you can't just take my son away based on the opinions of people who don't understand our family situation. Mr. Fallon, I'm basing this decision on documented evidence of neglect, professional assessments from qualified educators, and the clear testimony that your son's well-being has deteriorated significantly under your care. This is a temporary arrangement designed to ensure Noah's safety while we conduct a thorough evaluation. As we left the courtroom, Lucas caught up with me in the hallway. His face was pale, and for the first time in years, he looked genuinely shaken. Dad, please, don't do this. He's my son. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the angry, defensive man who'd been arguing with me for weeks, but the scared, overwhelmed boy he'd never quite stopped being. Lucas, he's been your son for 7 years. When were you planning to start acting like his father? I walked away, Noah's small hand in mine, leaving Lucas standing in the courthouse hallway with the wreckage of the life he'd built on neglect and good intentions. The call came Tuesday morning while I was making Noah breakfast in my kitchen, something that still felt surreal after just one day. Noah was sitting at my table in pajamas that actually fit him, eating scrambled eggs without asking permission, and for the first time in months, he looked like a normal 7-year-old child. Cedric, it's Victor. I need to talk to you about Lucas. I stepped into the living room, keeping my voice low. What happened? He didn't show up for work yesterday or today. When he finally called this morning, he was a mess, talking about how his life is falling apart, how he's lost his son, how he doesn't know what to do next. What did you tell him? I told him that we needed to discuss his employment status, and that given everything that's happening, it might be best for everyone if he took some time to sort out his personal situation. You fired him. I terminated his employment, yes, but Cedric, I want you to know this wasn't about the custody situation. His performance had been declining for months. Missing deadlines, poor client communication, showing up late. Yesterday and today were just the final straws. I understood what Victor was telling me. Lucas's job loss wasn't my fault, but the timing would make it look like I'd orchestrated his professional destruction along with his custody loss. From his perspective, I'd systematically dismantled his life in a matter of days. How did he take it? Not well. He accused me of conspiring with you, said I was destroying his family to help you steal his son. I tried to explain that this was purely a business decision, but he wasn't in a frame of mind to listen to reason. After Victor hung up, I sat in my living room and thought about what this meant. Lucas was now unemployed and had lost custody of his son in the same week. His wife was facing public scrutiny of her parenting. His father, the person who'd been financially supporting his household, was now his legal adversary. From the outside, it would look like I'd executed a calculated campaign to destroy my son's life. But from the inside, it felt like the inevitable collapse of a structure that had been built on unstable foundations from the beginning. Grandpa, Noah appeared in the doorway, still holding his fork. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, buddy. How are those eggs? They're good. Grandpa, am I going to live here now? The question was asked with such careful neutrality that it broke my heart. Even now, even after a judge had placed him in my custody, Noah was afraid to express hope about his situation. For now, yes. Is that okay with you? He nodded solemnly. I like it here. It's quiet. Quiet. In his 7-year-old vocabulary, that was the word he'd chosen to describe the absence of tension, conflict, and emotional chaos that had defined his previous living situation. Noah, I want you to know that you're safe here. You don't have to ask permission to get food or water or use the bathroom. You don't have to apologize for having feelings or needing things. This is your home now, and homes are supposed to feel safe. He studied my face with those serious eyes that had seen too much for his age. What about Daddy? Is he mad at me? Your daddy isn't mad at you, Noah. He's confused and upset about the situation. But none of this is your fault. Adults are responsible for making sure children are safe and happy, and sometimes that means making difficult decisions. Like you did? Like I did. He nodded and went back to his breakfast, but I could see him processing this information in the careful way he'd learned to evaluate everything before deciding how to respond. The rest of the day was a revelation in how different life could be when a child's needs were the priority rather than an inconvenience. Noah helped me with small tasks around the house without being asked. He played quietly with toys I'd bought him, actually engaging with them instead of just going through the motions. He asked questions about everything: how the garage door opener worked, why I kept tools organized in specific ways, what different car parts were called. It was like watching a plant that had been kept in a dark closet finally getting sunlight. But that evening, reality intruded in the form of Marina's phone call. Cedric, we need to talk. About what? About the damage you've done to this family. Lucas lost his job today. Did you know that? Your little legal stunt cost him his employment. Lucas lost his job because of his own performance issues. That has nothing to do with the custody situation. Don't lie to me. You coordinated this whole thing. First you take Noah away, then you make sure Lucas can't support his family. What's next, Cedric? Are you going to try to destroy our marriage too? I almost laughed at the irony. Marina was accusing me of destroying a marriage that had been built on the emotional neglect of a 7-year-old child. Marina, I didn't have to destroy anything. I just stopped enabling Lucas to avoid the consequences of his choices. His choices? What about Noah's choices? Did you ask him what he wanted, or did you just decide that you knew better than his parents? I asked him what he wanted when he handed me a drawing, begging me to take him away from your house. That seemed like a pretty clear indication of his preferences. There was a pause, and when Marina spoke again, her voice had shifted from anger to something that sounded almost like pleading. Cedric, Noah is a troubled child. He needs structure, consistency, firm boundaries. You're going to spoil him, and when this custody arrangement ends, we're going to have to undo all the damage you've done. When this custody arrangement ends? The judge said this was temporary. When Lucas gets back on his feet, when we complete the counseling requirements, Noah will come home where he belongs. I realized that Marina genuinely believed this was a temporary setback, a bureaucratic inconvenience that would be resolved once they jumped through the required legal hoops. She had no understanding of how fundamentally the situation had changed, or how unlikely it was that a judge would return Noah to an environment that had been officially documented as neglectful. Marina, this isn't a punishment that ends when you've served your time. This is about Noah's safety and well-being. If you want any chance of being part of his life going forward, you need to understand why he was removed from your care in the first place. He was removed because you manipulated the system and convinced people who don't know our family that we were abusing him. He was removed because he was being emotionally neglected, and because every adult who interacted with him professionally could see that he was in distress. That's not true. Marina, Noah has gained 3 pounds in 4 days. He's sleeping through the night for the first time in months. He's asking questions, playing with toys, acting like a normal 7-year-old child. If your home environment was healthy, why is he thriving so dramatically after being removed from it? Silence. I want to see him, she said finally. The court ordered supervised visitation. You can arrange that through your attorney. Supervised visitation? I'm not some kind of criminal, Cedric. I've been Noah's mother for 2 years. You've been Noah's stepmother for 2 years, and you've spent that time teaching him that his needs don't matter, his feelings are inconvenient, and his safety is conditional on his ability to stay invisible. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. And Marina? The fact that you can't see it, even now, is why Noah isn't coming back. I hung up and found Noah standing in the hallway, clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation. Was that Marina? Yes. Is she mad at me? I knelt down so I was at his eye level. Noah, listen to me very carefully. Marina is upset about the situation, but that's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong by telling me you needed help. You didn't do anything wrong by wanting to feel safe and loved. Adults are responsible for creating safe homes for children, and when they don't do that, other adults have to step in to protect the children. Like you did. Like I did. He hugged me then, a fierce, desperate hug that told me everything I needed to know about whether I'd made the right decision. That night, after Noah had gone to bed, I sat in my kitchen and called Rachel to update her on the day's developments. Lucas lost his job. Performance-related termination, but the timing makes it look coordinated. That's actually helpful for our case. It demonstrates that he's not in a position to provide stable support for Noah even if he regains custody. Rachel, what are the realistic chances that Noah will have to go back to that house? Based on the evidence we've presented and the way he's responding to placement with you, very low. The judge will order a full psychological evaluation, home studies, and extended observation periods. But unless Lucas and Marina make dramatic, documented changes in their approach to parenting, Noah will likely remain with you permanently. And if they do make those changes? Cedric, people like Marina don't change their fundamental approach to relationships because a judge orders them to. They might go through the motions of counseling and parenting classes, but the underlying attitudes that created this situation don't disappear because they're inconvenient. After I hung up, I checked on Noah one more time before going to bed. He was sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed in a way I'd never seen during his visits to my house when he'd lived with Lucas and Marina. His breathing was steady, and he wasn't curled up in the defensive position I'd noticed during previous sleepovers. This was what a safe child looked like while sleeping. As I turned off his bedroom light, I thought about Lucas's question from the previous week. Was this really about Noah, or was this about punishing him for not living up to my expectations? The answer was simpler than he'd imagined. This was about a 7-year-old boy who'd been brave enough to ask for help, and about an adult who'd finally been brave enough to provide it, regardless of the consequences. Everything else, Lucas's job loss, Marina's anger, the destruction of their carefully constructed family image, was just the inevitable result of building a life on the neglect of a child who deserved better. 6 weeks later, I walked into the same courthouse for the final custody hearing, but everything had changed. Noah was thriving in ways that made the previous situation look even worse by comparison. He'd gained weight, started sleeping through the night, and begun displaying the curiosity and energy that had been suppressed in his previous environment. His teacher reported that his academic performance had improved dramatically, and Mrs. Henderson noted that his anxiety behaviors had virtually disappeared. But the most significant change was in Noah himself. He'd started expressing preferences, asking for things he wanted, and even disagreeing with me occasionally, all signs of a child who felt safe enough to have his own opinions. Lucas looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. Marina sat beside him, perfectly put together as always, but there was a brittleness to her composure that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. Judge Brantor reviewed the reports from the court-appointed psychologist, the social worker who'd conducted home studies, and the family counselor who'd been working with Lucas and Marina. Her expression grew more serious as she read. Mr. Lucas Fallon, I've reviewed the evaluation reports, and I have some concerns about your progress in addressing the issues that led to this custody change. Lucas's attorney whispered something to him, but Lucas shook his head and stood up. Your Honor, I've attended every counseling session, completed every requirement you ordered. I've learned about child development and parenting strategies. I understand that I made mistakes, but I'm ready to be a better father to Noah. Mr. Fallon, understanding that you made mistakes and actually changing your fundamental approach to parenting are two different things. According to the family counselor's report, you continue to minimize the severity of Noah's distress in your previous household. You've described his emotional needs as excessive sensitivity and his requests for help as attention-seeking behavior. I watched Lucas's face as the judge spoke, and I could see him struggling to understand how his attempts to explain the situation were actually making it worse. Your Honor, I didn't mean to minimize anything. I just think that Noah has always been a more sensitive child than average, and maybe the situation at home wasn't the best fit for his personality. Judge Brantor looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Fallon, Noah wasn't a poor fit for your household. Your household was a poor fit for a child, any child. She turned to Marina. Mrs. Fallon, the psychological evaluation indicates that you continue to view Noah's emotional needs as behavioral problems to be corrected, rather than normal childhood requirements to be met. You've described his attachment to his grandfather as unhealthy dependency, and his improved behavior in Mr. Cedric Fallon's care as temporary manipulation. Marina stood up, her composure finally cracking. Your Honor, I've tried to be a good stepmother to Noah, but he's always been resistant to my authority. He plays adults against each other, and he's learned that acting upset gets him what he wants. Mrs. Fallon, Noah was 7 years old when these behaviors began. 7-year-olds don't manipulate adults. They respond to their environment. If a child is consistently anxious, withdrawn, and seeking help from outside sources, that's not manipulation. That's survival. The judge turned to Noah, who was sitting with Mrs. Henderson again, wearing a button-down shirt I'd helped him pick out that morning. Noah, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Is that okay?" He nodded solemnly. "How do you like living with your grandfather?" "I like it a lot. He makes me breakfast, and he helps me with my homework, and he doesn't get mad when I ask questions." "Do you miss living with your father and stepmother?" Noah glanced at Lucas, and I could see him trying to figure out the right answer, the one that wouldn't hurt anyone's feelings. "I miss my daddy sometimes, but I like living with Grandpa better because it's quieter and I don't have to worry about making mistakes." "What kind of mistakes were you worried about making?" "Like asking for things, or crying when I got hurt, or not sharing good enough with Ethan." Judge Brantor made a note, then asked, "Noah, if you could choose where to live, what would you choose?" "I want to live with Grandpa, but I want to see Daddy sometimes too if he's not mad at me." "Noah, your daddy isn't mad at you. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about what's best for children, and those decisions can be confusing. But none of this is your fault, okay?" He nodded, but I could see he didn't entirely believe it. Children always assume they're responsible for adult conflicts, even when they're explicitly told otherwise. The judge reviewed several more documents, asked questions about my living situation and support systems, and then delivered her final ruling. Based on the comprehensive evaluation, the child's demonstrated improvement in Mr. Cedric Fallon's care, and the ongoing concerns about the previous household environment, I'm granting permanent custody to Mr. Cedric Fallon. Mr. Lucas Fallon will have supervised visitation rights, with the possibility of increased access pending successful completion of additional counseling and parenting education. Lucas stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, you can't just take my son away permanently. I'm his father. I love him." "Mr. Fallon, loving a child and being able to provide appropriate care for a child are not the same thing. Your love for Noah is not in question. Your ability to prioritize his needs over your own convenience is." "But I can change. I am changing. The counselor said I'm making progress." "Mr. Fallon, you've made progress in understanding the concepts of appropriate childcare. But understanding concepts and implementing them consistently are different skills. Noah needs stability, consistency, and an environment where his emotional needs are recognized and met. Based on the evidence, you're not currently able to provide that environment." As we left the courthouse, Lucas caught up with me in the parking lot. He looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before, and for a moment, I felt sorry for him. "Dad, I know you think I'm a terrible father, but I never wanted to hurt Noah. I was just trying to build something for our future." "Lucas, intentions don't matter if the results are harmful. You spent 2 years prioritizing your business dreams over your son's immediate needs, and Noah paid the price for that choice." "So that's it? I lose my son forever because I made some mistakes?" "You don't lose him forever, but you lose the right to make decisions about his daily care because you proved you couldn't handle that responsibility." "And Marina? What about her rights?" I looked at him incredulously. "Marina has no legal rights regarding Noah. She never adopted him, and she's been identified as a contributing factor to his neglect. Lucas, if you want any chance of rebuilding a relationship with your son, you need to understand that Marina's approach to parenting was damaging to him. She was trying to teach him structure and discipline. She was teaching him that his needs didn't matter and his feelings were inconvenient. There's a difference." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, staring at the courthouse behind me. "What happens now? Now Noah grows up in a stable environment where he's valued and protected. You get supervised visits and the opportunity to rebuild your relationship with him gradually, if you can demonstrate that you've actually changed your approach to parenting. And if I can't? Then Noah grows up with a grandfather who loves him instead of a father who was too busy chasing success to notice his son was disappearing." I walked away, Noah's hand in mine, leaving Lucas standing in the courthouse parking lot with the wreckage of the life he'd built on neglect and good intentions. As we drove home, Noah was unusually quiet. "Grandpa, is Daddy sad?" "Yes, buddy, he's very sad." "Because of me?" I pulled over and turned to look at him directly. "Noah, your daddy is sad because he made choices that hurt you, and now he has to live with the consequences of those choices. He's not sad because of anything you did. He's sad because of things he didn't do." "What didn't he do?" "He didn't protect you when you needed protection. He didn't listen when you tried to tell him you were unhappy. He didn't make sure you felt safe and loved in your own home." Noah processed this information with that serious expression I'd come to know well. "But you did those things." "I did those things. So I get to stay with you? You get to stay with me?" He smiled then, the first genuinely happy smile I'd seen from him in months. "Good. I like living with you better anyway." That evening, after Noah had gone to bed, I sat in my kitchen and thought about the path that had led us here. 6 months ago, I'd been an enabling grandfather who made excuses for his son's failures and told himself that things would improve on their own. Tonight, I was the legal guardian of a 7-year-old boy who'd been brave enough to ask for help when the adults responsible for his care had failed him. The cost had been enormous. My relationship with Lucas was probably irreparably damaged. Marina would never forgive me for exposing her treatment of Noah. The family I'd hoped could be healed had been permanently fractured, but Noah was safe. He was thriving. He was sleeping peacefully in the bedroom down the hall, confident that he would wake up in a place where his needs mattered and his feelings were valid. I pulled out the drawing that had started everything, the simple crayon sketch of a grandfather and grandson holding hands next to a car. Such a small thing to change so many lives. But sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages, and sometimes the bravest thing an adult can do is listen to a child who's asking for help. Noah had asked me to take him with me. I'd found a way to do exactly that, and despite everything it had cost, I knew I'd made the right choice. Because in the end, protecting a child is more important than preserving the illusion of a happy family. And sometimes love means being willing to be the villain in someone else's story so you can be the hero in the story that actually matters.